But I would suggest that you can't isolate that one issue of tariffs, raising taxes on Americans, as being the cause for that. There was a correlation, not a causation. And in fact, in addition to that, I would say that given all the other things that were being discussed, the tariffs were not the reason why they did this, okay? Hello, welcome to this week's Economy. I'm your host, Dr. Vance Ginn. Thank you for joining me again today. I've got a lot to talk about. We've got major changes that are underway in the federal government with Trump being in office now. He's tackling the size and scope of government, or appears to be doing so far, a move that is long overdue. We're also gaining more insight into his plans for imposing tariffs, which could raise prices for Americans across the country. Now is the time for bold reforms, whether it's slashing government spending at the state, federal, and local levels, championing free markets at all these places, or encouraging innovation to maintain our global competitiveness. In this episode and in the show notes that you can find at vanceginn.substack.com, I'll explore a Texas school choice bill, a new competitor in the AI sector, calls to abolish the CFPB, and much more. One thing that I did want to say before I get too far into this, though, is my prayers are with those who lost their lives in this accident or whatever ended up happening over in D.C. by the Reagan airport in this crash between American Airlines plane and a military helicopter. Not sure what all is happening yet. I'm recording this on Thursday, January 30th. So maybe more information will come out by the time this airs. But I did want to note that my prayers are with those folks. I've flown into Reagan many times. It's an unfortunate situation. All right. Okay. So number one that I'm going to talk about today is Trump tariffs tax Americans. In the news, during a recent address to House Republicans, Trump outlined his approach to tariffs, emphasizing that businesses would need to build in the United States to avoid paying taxes or tariffs. He also mentioned that he would start with high-profile industries such as pharmaceuticals, steel, and technology, and gradually expanding these measures over time. My take on this is that this is a tax on Americans, right? It's a tariff is none other than a tax on something that we import, that we're purchasing from another country. It just so happens that maybe we couldn't find it here. Maybe it was too expensive in America or something else, but we've decided to purchase it from someone else in another country. Because remember, America can't trade with China or India or any other country. Americans trade with the Chinese or Indians and that sort of thing. And so this really also creates a problem, creates a distortion in the marketplace who are voluntarily otherwise, coming together based on prices, based on the quality of products and everything else that's out there to make these exchanges. Now, there might be reasons for getting involved, for national security threats and other things. I just don't happen to believe that tariffs are the right tool to do that. In fact, there was some discussion recently about what happened with Colombia, where we were sending back some planes full of people who were illegal aliens in the United States to send them back to Colombia. They decided not to accept them there. And basically, President Trump put out a proposal that said, look, we're going to put a 25% tariff on Colombia and a whole bunch of other restrictions. I think there were 10 or 11 other restrictions that were in there. Some will claim that the tariff was what changed the Colombians' mind, because ultimately they let the planes land and they started that whole process. But I would suggest that you can't isolate that one issue of tariffs, raising taxes on Americans, as being the cause for that. There was a correlation, not a causation. And in fact, in addition to that, I would say that given all the other things that were being discussed, the tariffs were not the reason why they did this, okay? I'm also skeptical of some on the right who will claim, well, look, this worked this time, so we need to keep using it. That's not what tariffs are there for, right? The executive branch was giving some leeway with what to do with tariffs because they were trying to be less protectionist, more free market back in the day, not to start to put it more towards using it as a tool or a hammer with which to use in these sort of conflicts. And so I'm really concerned about the direction that's heading, in addition to any other sort of targeted tariffs or broadband tariffs or anything else. We don't need new taxes on Americans to deal with these problems. Okay. There may be other ways to do with this, politically and everything else, but tariffs aren't the way to go. That's hurting Americans along the way. And so I really hope that instead we can find ways that are supporting Americans and American businesses by getting government out of the way, reducing corporate tax rates, hopefully to zero at some point, deregulating a lot of things, reducing the cost of doing business across the country. Those are the sort of things that the Trump administration should be looking at doing, not raising taxes in the process, okay? And another big part of that, I think, is that we need to be looking at what's happening with free trade, with the free trade agreements with other countries, especially our allies. I know I've talked about this a lot of times, but I really think this is going to be a better approach than going after the Fed, going after different countries, using tariffs and everything else. I mean, the Fed shouldn't even exist, but as long as they are in place, we should have rules in place to do something about them. And I think by moving to a more free market approach that has long worked in America, despite the hits that it often takes, we'd be in a much better position. All right. So number 2, Texas debates school choice. In the news, the Texas Senate quickly passed Senate Bill 2 out of their committee, the Education Committee, which would introduce universal school choice for Texas students. If passed, and by the full Senate, the bill would establish education savings accounts, ESAs, providing $10,000 per student if you go to a private school or charter school, $11,500 for those who are special education or other types of needs related, or $2,000 for homeschoolers and others who don't go to a private or charter school. So I think that this is a way to definitely empower families with ESAs to not be trapped in the government school monopoly system based on wherever you live in that district. Okay. We need other approaches that are out there. And I think the ESAs is the best way to go. My concerns are that there are probably too many regulations in this bill that are stifling what parents could otherwise be able to do for their kids' education. They know their kids' education best. We should free them up to do whatever they can. Also, while there is $1 billion that's added to the budget, so these are separate things, but the budget would provide $1 billion to educate about 95,000 kids, many of them getting that $10,000 ESA. Remember, that's only about 1.5% of the 6.3 million school-aged kids across the state. In addition, they also are trying to increase public education funding or government school funding by another more than $5 billion in the House and Senate budgets. And so you have a small amount going to a school choice program and a lot more going to public schools. And by the way, the new Nation's Report Card known as NAEP, those scores showed that Texas students are not performing any better. If in fact, they're actually performing worse in math and reading, 2 key areas that you look at when you look at the projection of their income, projection of their education and skills over time. We're just doing a disservice to students across the state, really across the country in many ways, except for 10 or 11 states that have actual school choice now, universal school choice. Texas needs to be one of them. And so what I would like to see instead is a clean bill that's just dealing with ESAs, all right? Not more money to fund rural schools or more or teachers more or anything like that in the government school system, because we need competition that allows for parents to be empowered to send their kids where they need to go, where their kids need to go, rather than saying, you know what, we're going to fund this program over here and another program over here. That doesn't really increase competition in the marketplace. And I think if we could do that, you allow for competition and prices and tuition and all that fun stuff that works so well in many other markets across the economy to also work in Texas, all right, in the education related sector. And so I think that there's a good opportunity here. Senate Bill 2 will probably be on the floor pretty soon. Governor Greg Abbott will have his State of the State address on Sunday, so right before this is released. And my guess is that this full Senate will have SB 2 on up for a vote very soon. So it's something to look at. There's been some pushback on it, and I can see why, given some of the dynamics that are there. I think this bill is better in many respects compared to what was looked at back in 2023. But at the end of the day, I still think we need a clean bill that only looks at ESAs, that makes it universal eligibility where everyone is eligible for it. You can opt out if you want to. And it funds everyone who wants to use the program. Ideally, right, we would scrap the school finance system that we have today that we spend like $95 billion on a year and only fund ESAs for the 6.3 million kids. We could do it at $12,000 and still only spend $75 billion. I say only $75 billion. And that would save $20 billion a year in Texas. I mean, that would be massive. And you could use that extra money to reduce property taxes, reduce sales taxes, give the money back to taxpayers instead of funding a bureaucratic system that continues to have poor outcomes. And just to add to this point, some new data from the Texas Education Agency just came out in their annual report showing that since 2011, per student funding is up, or per student spending is up 48%. And then you put in place, and that was through 2023, so we don't have the latest numbers for 2024 yet. If you look at the 2024 NAEP scores for 8th grade math proficiency, it's down 40% since 2011 still. And so we have a massive amount of increase in spending per student, 48%. Inflation during that time since 2011 to 2023 is about 35%. So it's well above inflation. And that's adjusted for students before you start hitting me over the head with that. And outcomes are going down. And this is more reason why I continue to say government schools are overfunded. They don't need any more funding. All right. We need education choice and we need freedom for parents to be able to send their kids where they want to go with their taxpayer dollars, and the money that's going in there should move forward to ESAs. All right. Number 3. Grind government to a halt. In the news, President Trump's recent executive orders have sent shockwaves through the federal government, leading to rescinded job offers and a disruption of businesses as usual. Look, a long-needed shakeup this is a long-needed shakeup, all right? The federal government has long been expanding size and scope. A shakeup like this is not only overdue, but essential for driving meaningful change. We've got to rein in government spending. That's $36 trillion is our national debt now, and it's projected to rise by $2 trillion a year over the next decade if nothing is done. So these reforms by the Department of Government Efficiency, this executive order for federal employees, which are more than 2 million of them, to resign if they don't want to come back into the office, and they can get paid through, I think, like October, like 8 months, they could get paid if they just resign. This could be a great way to reduce the number of federal employees and go find a more productive job out in the private sector. There's a lot of shortages, labor shortages that are still out there. So maybe there's some opportunities that they didn't even know about that they could find a better way for themselves and their family as well. And look, with the Department of Government Efficiency, I think President Trump should really make a big approach here to say, you know what, I'm going to follow through with what the DOJ wants to provide, and I'm going to work with OMB, and I'm going to work with Congress. I'm going to use the bully pulpit to veto everything until they get these spending cuts done. Because if not, we're going to continue to have massive economic crises and fiscal crises along the way, and that's going to deal with inflation, higher interest rates, and everything else. This is the time, okay, to really start to bend the cost curve here. Number 4, abolish the CFPB. In the news, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau operates with little accountability, funds itself unilaterally, and enforces regulations based on its consumers' behaviors and theories, right? And many experts are calling for the abolishment of this government agency and are asking the Trump administration to take a closer look. My take is that the CFPB has many troubling parts of this and should be ended. It's funded through funds by the Federal Reserve, which is running losses, I think over $200 billion a year right now. And so how are they getting their money? Well, it's very difficult. This is adding to the deficits running by the Fed, which means they have less money to send to the Treasury, costing taxpayers more in the process and increasing inflation. Also, when you think about some of the regulations that CFPB has put in place, such as Section 1033 and banning medical debt from factoring into credit scores, I mean, all this stuff is just nonsense of woke nonsense that's happening at the CFPB that I hope the Trump administration and others can get this thing back in line somehow, because it's heading in a bad direction. And look, the Federal Reserve is funding it about $600 million per year outside the power of the purse. This is how it was all set up. And I just think that it should be abolished entirely. And until then, we've got to start rolling back these regulations that are hurting Americans, hurting so many people, and hurting the financial position of many Americans along the way. All right. Number 5. DeepSeek AI upends stock market. In the news, Chinese startup DeepSeek AI assistant became the top downloaded free app on Apple's iPhone store last week. The NASDAQ fell 3% on one day, with NVIDIA losing $600 billion in that day in market value, after DeepSeek AI unveiled its cutting-edge generative ID, sending shockwaves through global tech markets. This surge has raised concern among U.S. tech industry observers who worry that the Chinese company, which is what DeepSeek is, has caught up with American leaders in generative AI at a fraction of the cost. My take is that I'm glad to see that consumers are going to get more choices. That's what we need. We need more competition in the marketplace. When you think about the huge amount of cost of the CHIPS Act, of the amount of going into AI, and these data centers and everything else, is a lot of energy that's being used. And I'm not against those data centers at all. What I think is we need more energy in abundance, especially like the small modular reactors that they could use, and even put some energy out on the grids as well. I think those would all be huge. We also just saw about $500 billion more that could be put into AI generation and data centers in Texas, right? I think all that is good. But this DeepSeek, what could be interesting though, is that it doesn't use nearly as much energy. There's not as much of the semiconductors that are used. And so it could be not only cheaper and more affordable for many more people, but it could also mean less use of energy. And this is one of the great things that I think about AI and technology, and just how fast that the progress is happening, is that as soon as government thinks that they're on the front edge of it, they are always behind. I mean, it's historically been the case. The government's always behind things, behind the curve. And that's again happening right now when we look at AI and the technology and everything else. And so as soon as they come out and say we need more broadband for everybody to be connected, you've got Starlink coming, right, from Elon Musk, that's going to put this to rest basically over time. Yet we're spending billions of dollars on it. And I think the same thing could happen with data mining and mining centers and everything else, is that this is a historic opportunity for us to expand and have more growth. At the same time, we've got to be cautious of some of these other areas that's saying, well, we don't need as much energy. We could do it in a better way. Let's go in that direction instead of government trying to send us in a direction that will always be behind the curve. Look, get the government out of the way. That's really what we should be doing at the end of the day. So that's what I got for you today. Thanks for joining me in this episode of This Week's Economy. For more insights, visit vanceginn.com and get even greater value with a paid subscription, or you can get a no-charge subscription to my Substack newsletter at vanceginn.substack.com. God bless you, and let people prosper.